Appreciate about your voice, Justin, is it's very easy in this very partisan moment in our culture to only attack the other side. But what I see you doing so well, not only on your podcast, your books, but even as you speak with us, is and even talking over the luncheon with other leaders, is how you're able to see the good in others. So, man, we so need that call to be able to see the dignity and value and worth in other people and the good in other folks. So thank you for that. Thank you for your prophetic voice. Guys, we're going to get right into it with a few questions, and we're going to start right at the top with one that you guys upvoted. So here's the first question coming from everybody: Is there ever a wrong choice in God's eyes for whom you vote? Also, is it wrong to abstain from voting?
Is there ever a wrong, can you guys hear me? Okay. Is there ever a wrong choice? I can see situations where there could be a clearly wrong choice. I can see that. I think we're probably a little too quick in our society to claim that one side is kind of God's side, and I think we got to be very slow to make that claim. You know, as somebody who's been in politics for a long time, who's worked with people on both sides, I wouldn't put Jesus' stamp on either side, honestly. I just wouldn't. I'd be very slow to do it. Now, you can make your case issue to issue why you think this is the best choice for a Christian. Be very slow. Again, we talked about the praying Pharisee who looks at the tax collectors like, I'm exalting myself. Look at that. I'm glad I'm not like that person. We can very quickly go there in our politics because we disagree with on a serious issue with folks on the other side. Be very slow to take that kind of arrogant position and put God's stamp on a whole party or on a candidate's agenda when there's a lot of other stuff going on that that people can care about and vote on. What was the second part of the question?
Second part of the question was, is it wrong to abstain from voting?
Generally, I encourage people to vote. I think, and we talked about this earlier, I think when you have a vote, when you have a voice, you have influence. And I do believe Christians should use their influence to help people. So while I could never say that it's a sin not to vote, right? I would question whether it's good stewardship. Now, there are situations where you say, I'm abstaining from voting because that is a statement. There may be situations where that's the case. I would imagine, I don't see those too often where that's the best way to go with it. But no, I think you should vote. I can't say that abstaining is sinful or unfaithful or anything like that.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. Somebody says, I've had my salvation questioned multiple times by conservative Christians for being a Democrat, saying Democrats can't be Christians. How would you encourage this person to respond?
I first would question the premise. I question the premise because it suggests that my party is part of my identity. And for me, I see my party as a tool that I use to do good. And here's a way to test whether your party is part of your identity. Can someone critique or even attack your party or your favorite politician without you getting upset? If you get upset anytime that happens, your identity is in the wrong place. And it doesn't mean you should care less about politics. It means that you shouldn't tie yourself so closely to a party. You can be in a party, but I wouldn't tie myself that closely to it because, again, a lot of the things that go on in a party, number one, parties are very fickle, right? So parties are about power, and they will change their stances at any given moment. And we've seen that in this election when it comes to abortion. We've seen that in this election when it comes to building a wall. They will take stuff that they swore was the most evil and wicked thing ever, and they will accept it and bring it into their platform for power. That's not where you want to put your identity. So that's the first thing I would question. Think of it as a tool that you use to move forward. Because I would question, like, what is party loyalty for a Christian? Does party loyalty mean when they have bad behavior, I'm going to defend it? This party loyalty men, when they have bad policies, I'm going to defend it. Is that justifiable as a Christian? I just think both parties are too fickle and too far from what is good on a lot of issues for that to be a place where you place your identity. And then I'll say this: can you if you are a Christian that's a Democrat, that can be an unfaithful place to be. I don't think your party automatically makes you unfaithful, but let me say this. If you're in the Democratic Party, and I've spent most of my life in the Democratic Party, and you have nothing to say about anything they have to say about abortion or some of the things that are in these school curriculums, if you have nothing to say about that, if everything they put out you're okay with, I would question whether that's faithful. You being in the Democratic Party doesn't automatically make you unfaithful, but if you go along with everything they put out, I would question that. If you're in the Republican Party, being in that party alone to me doesn't make you unfaithful because I'm not going to assume it's part of your identity. But if you have nothing to say about some of the ways that immigrants have been spoken about, if you have nothing to say about how some parts of the party, not everybody, may deal with racial justice or issues that are very sensitive to other people, but the right can have a very hardened heart and be very callous towards people. If you have nothing to say about that, to me, that's what makes you unfaithful, not just simply associating with the party if you're willing to call them out. I would like to see Christians in both parties that are willing to stand up to the party when they're wrong. If we want to be a little more shrewd and sophisticated about it, that's what we should do. We should want Christians in both parties who have integrity, who are going to be peacemakers and who are going to stand up for what's right. So I think there's a better way to look at that question. And I think we're way too quick to say somebody's unfaithful based on a party that really is just a tool and that's fickle and that we should be relying upon in that way anyway.
Man, that's good. That's so good. Yeah, I want you guys to hear that the political party that you choose to associate with can never be our identity. It can never be an identity marker. That's such a good reminder.
And it should never cause you to vote for somebody who is obviously against certain convictions. You should be able to vote for either party, right? Like, it shouldn't bind you in the way that the gospel binds you on certain things.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, I heard you bring up abortion. On this topic of abortion, somebody makes the statement and asks the question, where did that question just go? It just disappeared. It's all right, Andrew.
I tried to remove the one you answered, and I hit the wrong one.
Okay.
No worries.
I think we kind of remember.
The question was somewhere along the lines: is abortion an important enough? Look there now. There it is. Is abortion a topic important enough to be a single-tier voter? Since it is arguably the most important social issue today and is rooted in a demonic nature.
I think that abortion is a very serious issue. I think the pro-life cause is a very important cause. I have no problem with somebody saying that's my number one issue and putting it at the top of what they're voting on. The way I would question it being a single vote issue is that I don't think that you completely address that issue by just the birth conversation. We know that many women who have abortions, they have abortions because they don't think they can take care of the child. Maybe how you vote on health care matters too. I think there is some wickedness in that industry. There's some wickedness in the Democratic Party based on that industry, but I also would say it's been legislative malpractice on the right for not even having a plan when it comes to health care. Not even having a plan. That was an embarrassing moment for Trump when he said, well, I have a concept. Think about how people are hurting based on our healthcare system. That's malpractice. And so to say, I'm going to vote for this person because he says he's going to take care of that, but I'm not going to think how healthcare, maternal mortality impacts that, or how other social programs could impact that, I just don't think that's a wise way to think about it. So that can be your number one issue, but is that person saying they're pro-life addressing it in all the ways that it needs to be addressed? I don't normally see that. So yeah, does that complicate it? It does complicate it, but if we're going to be honest, there's a lot of issues that touch that. No issue is on an island. And I think we need to be very careful of letting people pull us in and attach ourselves to a side or to a party just based on that kind of rhetoric. We need to question that. Are you really pro-life and you sit there and have no plan for health care? I mean, unborn life is extremely important, but a lot of other life is too. And people are suffering. People are going into serious debt because they want to live. Now, there's a lot of different ways to go about it. As a Christian, I can't say we all have to have one plan and one healthcare plan is the way to go, but we should care enough to force our parties to really deal with those issues in a different way.
Yeah, that's right. And I love how you say this is not an issue that exists on an island.
Yeah.
Can you tease that out a little bit more? What you mean by no issue really exists on an island?
Any issue has several different factors that impact it. So, okay, what's the situation of the mother? What are we doing within the culture, to impact that? Our healthcare system, how are our schools, housing? All those things impact when somebody's making that decision. And I think God always wants us to choose life. I think that's a real thing, but I also understand, I'm not going to sit here and say that's an easy decision for people. I'm not going to sit here and say, I think there's some wickedness in the industry. I'm not going to say that everybody that's considering it is being wicked. It's a tough issue, and I do believe people should choose life, but can we have the compassion to say it's a little more complicated than we make it sometimes? And if we have compassion for people, maybe we can get through to them better than I think some aspects of the pro-life movement has been getting through to them as of late. And we can just see it by the numbers, right?
Yeah, that's so good, because we can't just care about that beautiful baby, the image of God inside the womb. We also have to care about the mother who's going to take care of that baby, the baby when it comes out into this world, all the other family members, all the other issues that come along with it. And I love how you use the phrase, I think you used this phrase, correct me if I'm wrong, you more use the phrase whole life, as I heard you talk and write about before. Not so much opposed to pro-life, but in addition to.
Right.
Because it gives a bit more of a runway to what we mean by caring for the whole person. We have a question here.
And can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah, go for it.
I really want to make the point too that Christians cannot base their opinion on abortion off bumper stickers. I've met too many Christians that base their opinion off what the propaganda that we get from the left or the right. If you're on the left and your opinion is based on my body, my choice, that is a dumbing down of a very serious and complex issue. There is not just one body involved in this. And too many of my peers, I'm in progressive spaces, just leave it at that. It's not that simple. And we can't oversimplify it, deal with it in its complexities, and value all the lives and all the factors that weigh into it.
That's so helpful. So helpful. So yeah, keep going on that. How then can we as Christians reframe the conversation around being pro-life to include care for maternal health, good healthcare system, prison reform, immigration, and more?
I think we have to talk about it that way. Now, I want to say that a lot of people that are pro-life and that are activists do care about those things. You don't want to water that particular issue down so much by adding a whole lot of stuff on top of it. But we have to be clear, it's a broader issue. And we have to make sure that we're consistent on all the issues that the pro-life idea touches. If life is sacred, it's sacred before birth, it's sacred after birth, and at each of these stages. I've just seen too many people who are pro-life not consistent and consistently passionate about each of those pieces. And if we are, this is good news to me. If we are, then people begin to see that we're truly committed to it. If we limit it to just what we might think on the far right, then I think we get to the place where we are now, where people just don't believe that we really value it. It becomes this culture war issue where people think it's more about the rivalry, more about control, than actually the sanctity of life. And so we got to do some culture work in that regard.
Man, it's so good. And I think what we're talking about here is a phrase that you used in your talk of having a moral imagination. And somebody asked the question here, what is a practical example, maybe outside of the sanctity of life conversation, but maybe an example of living out a moral imagination in this particular election cycle that you've seen or would recommend? So what is a practical example of living out of a moral imagination in this election cycle that you've seen or would recommend?
I think one of the things that we have to do in any time period, right? If you talk about, so we're very polarized right now. And I talked about this as well. I think it really does take moral imagination to say, you disagree with me on a very serious issue, but I'm still going to hear you out on other issues. We tend to say, I have my one issue. For some of us, it's race. For some of us, it's abortion or other things. And if whoever disagrees with us on that is you're done. You're out of the question. But can we disagree with that and be clear in our disagreement and say, I have to believe that you might be right on some other things. And that's one of the things about Christianity. Somebody can be wrong about 99 things. If they're right about one thing, a Christian cannot deny that they're right about that one thing. But guess what our influencers do? Our influencers are going to point to that one thing that we really care about and tell us that we have to ignore the one thing that they're right about. We should be able to, I think it takes moral imagination to be a Harris supporter and find something in the MAGA movement that they get right. Even if it's not enough for me to vote that way, that they get right. To be a Trump supporter and find something on the left that they actually get right. Maybe if the church was more inclusive, even if I don't agree with the left's conclusions on that, think of all the times when the church should have been more inclusive and we committed terrible sins by not including other people. We should want people in society that care about inclusion, right? If I'm looking on the right, if you're on the left and you can't appreciate how people on the right adopt other people's kids and take care of them and care about orphans, that's a problem. That you can't see the good in that because you disagree with them on something else, or you find reasons that they're actually doing, they adopt kids and they're doing other stuff somehow for the wrong reason because they're always wrong. That's a lack of moral imagination. And in this moment, we need that to at least have some appreciation for people that we may disagree with, to see that they can do good and that we can find solutions and learn something from them.
Man, that's so helpful. That is so helpful. To completely maybe make a 90-degree left turn here. Completely different topic. Someone asked the question, how as Christians are we to make sense? I mean, this is a real easy one coming here. You ready for it? How are we to make sense of the conflict in Gaza?
The conflict in Gaza?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. This is like a whole conversation by itself. I think we have to care about life in general and be willing to question some of the assumptions that we make, number one, okay? So what Hamas did on, was it October 7th, October 6th? 7th? Yeah, was terrible. It was awful. I think there's a problem with anybody who doesn't admit that. The question that I would bring to some Christians that I've seen, especially on the right, is there such thing as an overly heavy-handed response to that? And we just need to search our hearts to say, okay, you deserve to defend yourself. How far does that go? How do we as a country try to bring peace and not let this elevate to a World War III and things of that nature? I'll kind of leave it at that because a lot of this isn't like biblical, right? Like I can't tell you have to take this certain position. And I would warn people too, don't make parts of this biblical that aren't biblical. The Bible does not force us to take a certain side in this conversation other than what's right. So we got to be very clear on our theology in this because there's a lot of bad theology floating around. There has never been a people that God said you can do whatever you want to do because you're close to me. So we need to be very careful how we look at this issue and question some of our assumptions, but care about lives in general. Israel gets to defend themselves. Palestinians deserve to live. There's a lot of Christians that are Palestinians over there that are going through hell. See this with clear eyes and with a judgment that kind of moves the bad theology and some of the assumptions out the way. And that's really all I can tell you, because I don't know that the Bible forces us to all come to one opinion. But let's try to be a little bit thoughtful and then understand the history of it.
It almost sounds like what you're saying is like we cannot succumb to the simplicity of there's a good side and an evil side.
I think that's problematic, yeah. That doesn't mean evil hasn't been done.
That's right.
But we got to be very careful with dismissing some lies because they're not on that side.
Would you say that trying to choose a side would be a form of partiality, or would it be something else? Like, I think some folks, if I would read behind this question a little bit, they're trying to figure out how to suss out what is good, what is evil in this moment, and how do we show supports, and then how do we stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves? Yep. Do you have any thoughts surrounding that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a final conclusion. Right. I think we have to read the news honestly. We have to look at the history honestly and say every life in this situation is valuable. The Bible does not force us to take a particular side outside of what is good and true. And geopolitics is complicated. I don't want to, and you can see I'm avoiding giving you an answer. I just want you, because that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to tell you what side to be on. I have my opinions, but I'm here to say, think of it clearly and just understand there's a lot of assumptions that can keep us from coming to the right conclusion. But what we know we don't want, I think we should all be able to agree, is we don't want a World War III. There should be some type of boundaries to how certain people can be treated at the end of the day. And we need to, as a church, articulate those. Take the time to articulate what those boundaries look like and what our role as an ally one way or another should look like. That's the framework that I want you to see it in, but I'm not gonna, I don't want to give you what the answer should be. I think the process of getting to an answer and being open to it is really important.
Yeah, because we can all agree on the principles,
right,
of this, that evil is evil, human life is valuable, defending oneself is good, but when it gets to the particularities of it, we can have disagreements and still not be divided. Yeah.
Defending oneself is justifiable, and it has its limits.
That's right. Yeah. So good. So good. Another question here. In talking about in terms of particular countries, Christ, the question here starts with a statement. Christ never said to put America before the rest of the world, yet we live in a country that considers America great and everywhere else evil. How do we respond to this?
So let me say this. You just heard what I said earlier today. One of my first statements was, I think this constitutional republic is exceptional in certain ways. I think our founding documents, just like Frederick Douglass thought, are amazing. When Frederick Douglass was going back and forth with other abolitionists that wanted to destroy the Union, he told them, I can't be with you on that. Now, these are two people that have the same primary goal and objective, which is huge to him because he was a former slave. But he says, when it comes to destroying the Union, I will not do that with you. I will not go there with you, because those documents in this Union actually gives us the opportunity to get rid of slavery. Whereas if you get rid of it, then you don't even have the mechanism, and things can get worse. Imagine the South without any type of connection to the Constitution and all that stuff. It could have gotten worse. So I think we need to keep that in mind. I do think there's something very exceptional about those founding documents and those founding ideals. And so having a sort of godly pride in that and saying there's something here that's worth defending. There's nothing wrong with that type of patriotism to say there's something here worth defending and people died for an ideal that actually means something. I don't see any problem with that. The problem comes when we take that and we put it on everything else. And we say everything we've done has been exceptional. Everything we do is... No. We have some exceptional achievements and some exceptional transgressions. And we don't look past slavery and Jim Crow and, a lot of the terrible things that have gone into this country. So we're not exceptional just by nature, right? We have some documents that I think have inspired the world and have done good for us and given us the ability to grow, the ability to achieve. It does not mean if we really, and I think this is G.K. Chesterton, when you love something, you try to improve it. You try to make it the best that it can be, and you don't just say it is great, just leave it how it is. No, improve it, because the Bible tells us that anything touched by human hands is imperfect. So we know we're imperfect. If we're honest about history and don't romanticize history, we deal with the fact that we've done some really bad things too and benefited from some bad things that have happened. And I think it's just the honesty of that. I disagree with the left when they say this country's terrible and everything is bad about it. No, that's not realistic. I mean, you watch television, you watch a football game, or you go to a church where there's great things going on that I think allow us to flourish. But we can't focus on those at the expense of the things that we have to improve because they're actually hurting people.
What's that quote again from G.K. Chesterton? If you love something...
It's from Orthodoxy. I can't remember the exact quote, but somebody who loves something wants to reform it and make it as good as it can be. You don't just leave it the way it is.
Man, I feel like that embodies a bit of that moral imagination that you're talking about, which is beautiful. And on that, trying to improve things, I think this questioner here is trying to improve the way that they think around voting. How can we practically vote in a way that is not strictly progressive or conservative when it seems we only have these two options on the ballot?
That's a good question. So the first thing I would do, again, is I would question the premise a little bit, because I would say voting is important, especially in national elections. It's not the whole of your public witness. So your public witness is not just how you vote. It's partially how you vote, but it's what issues you advocate for. So if I'm advocating for a pro-life issue and I'm also advocating for some poverty issue, I may be crossing the line to do that, and in that way, I'm kind of defying this fake binary that we see. Like, the Bible does, let me say this, when Jesus comes on the scene, there are these kind of rivalries that he sees, right? You got the Sadducees and you got the Pharisees. Jesus doesn't come in and say, you know what? The Pharisees are really legalistic, so I gotta be a Sadducee. He overturns the whole thing. He said, I'm not gonna be a Pharisee or a Sadducee because the Sadducees don't believe. And so he brings something new, which takes moral imagination. Christians have to have the moral imagination to say, conservatism and progressivism aren't the only ways to do things on every single issue, right? Conservatives may be right on certain things, but when they're wrong, I'm gonna say they're wrong and go another way. If you look even at the 2008 economic, downturn, both parties had their fingerprints all over that. So you mean to tell me that we had to choose the way that they both went, or if somebody actually had the imagination to say, no, all of this is wrong. We're going in the wrong direction. It's not a conservative or progressive thing. There's a better way to do that. We need to be able to find those moments when there's a better way to do it. As far as your everyday election where there's generally just a Democrat or a Republican, you do your best. You see what issues you care about, list those out, see where the candidates stand on those, and make the best choice that you can. But you can very much not just be in one category and focus on positions rather than being on the side in so many other parts of your public witness. And I think that's how you do it.
That's really helpful, and I think that's talking to the polarity of both sides. I think we've all interacted with people who have gone back and forth between the extremes of partisan politics. But a question came up at lunch today on that topic where, and maybe even some of y'all in here, we're just tired of the extremes. And we might know somebody, we might even be the person in this room who's just kind of like, I'm too tired to deal with this. I'm too tired to even vote. I just feel indifferent to it all. I thought you had a beautiful response to that over lunch today with some of our leaders. What would you say to someone who's just a little bit indifferent right now because they're just tired of all this?
I would affirm that there's a lot of things to be tired of. I mean, there's corruption. There's a sense that no matter what I do, they're going to do whatever they want to do, right? And that what I say doesn't seem to matter. So I want to tell people I hear you on that. Like, I'm not just going to dismiss that. I think there is something to that. However, politics touches every aspect of our society, right? Even can we go to church? A few years ago, we wouldn't be able to be in here, right? Because politics said we couldn't be in church at that time. So the person saying that they don't want to engage, are you saying that you don't want to have a say on what's in your children's food? Are you saying that you don't want to have a say in what constitutes a crime that could send somebody you love to jail unjustly? I don't think you would say that. And so I would say, although you can't impact everything and it doesn't always go the way you want, you can have an impact on people's lives and on a lot of different aspects of society. Again, for you to bypass that, I would question whether that's good stewardship. Because I can point to several issues that you care about that are touched by politics, and you need to have a say on that as much as you can. And we don't do good in society because we're always going to get the outcome we want. We do good in society because it glorifies God. Amen. Right? And so I may not, and this is another civil rights kind of culture thing, they knew that they might not get what they wanted at the end of the day, but fighting for it was just. Fighting for it was virtuous and true. And that's what glorifies God. At the end of the day, He's going to handle it, right? He can have an impact on it. He's going to have the impact on what happens at the end of the day. We're just servants. And so we serve Him, we do our best, and we work for that well done and leave the outcome to all these things, which we can't necessarily control, to Him.
Man, that sounds like something that I hear you and Chris Butler talk about on your podcast, that what matters more is not the political win,
right,
but our public witness. And it seems like that's what the civil rights movement cared more about, was their public witness for Christ. They didn't know if they were going to get the win or not.
Yep.
But the witness mattered more.
Yeah. And you also don't want to give people who want you to quit. Don't quit. Don't give people that, right? Like, you stay in the game. Do what's right. One of the things about the civil rights movement, I talked about this earlier, one of its guiding principles, of course, it wanted to change systems and institutions and did some of that and made America better for it. But what was more important than that as a guiding principle was no matter how ugly or mean or nasty your opponents got, you never let them have a negative impact on your spirit. Because you could win legislative battles, you could win electoral ballots, but if your spirit became negative, you lost too much. And so when we give up, when we become bitter, when we trade insult for insult in the public square, we've given over to politics more than it should ever be able to take from us. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind, even in this very polarized election.
Now, we got a question on here that got upvoted all the way to the top. Can we vote for you? I mean, you might have some.
Y'all haven't even heard my platform yet, right? No.
But on that topic of voting, I know we have a lot of questions here for voting, but Pastor Luke snuck in a question here, straight to my text message line. And then he emphasized it to make sure I saw it. And because I think it's such a great question, I'm going to ask it. What does it look like to practically care for and live out the gospel beyond the ballot box?
That's good. So one thing that I've been saying, because I've been traveling around the country having the same conversation, how can Christians go into this election constructively and faithfully? How can we come out of it constructively and faithfully? I think that we all know that if I were to say, if the world needs to know what faithful politics look like, just look at the church in America, I think we'd all say that's probably not true, right? That the church in America has kind of reflected what's going on in society more than we've corrected it in a lot of ways when it comes to politics. But one way we can be different is to realize that regardless of who wins in November, that our church, this church right here, this group of churches, if you're careful and you're diligent, you can have a greater and more direct impact on your community than whoever wins in Washington in November, right? So what will be the disposition of your spirit in November when you get those results? Will you be so upset that you can't have a conversation at the water cooler with somebody you know voted differently than you? If so, what is that telling them about who you believe in and what you believe in from a faith perspective? What is that telling them about your faith in Jesus Christ if you can't encourage anybody or have an upbeat, and everybody may be sad, it may hit you different ways, but if we give up, if we're so mad and bitter that our public witness becomes bitter, what does that tell people about what we truly believe? If you truly believe that you already have the victory, yeah, I care about this election because it's consequential, but guess what? It's not going to steal my joy because there's so much I can do in the community. I can still go to the local school board and make sure with groups of people and try to say, hey, what's in this curriculum? What are these kids learning? It matters. I care about that. You still can have a direct impact. And so, yeah, I would focus on what I can do locally. Can I get churches together and find an issue and create a story around the issue to motivate people to do something about it? If you really care, sometimes a vote, I want you to vote, but sometimes a vote can kind of be like a cop-out not to do anything else. A vote really ain't all that much as far as your whole public witness. You should be doing other things, and that should encourage you because your public witness won't be defined by that vote.
Stir our imagination a little bit of what that could practically look like, boots on the ground. I mean, yeah, maybe it could look like being on a school board, maybe it could look being a part of a neighborhood association. What else? Stir our imagination.
Yeah, I mean, you could run for office, you could run your neighborhood organization, or you could find an issue that's really hurting people in your sphere of influence, and you can advocate for it. Right? You can say, this is an issue that needs to be addressed and nobody's addressing it. How do I organize people around that? And let me tell you, in most city councils, if you bring 10 people consistently to the meeting, they're going to listen to you. If you bring 10 people consistently to the school board, they're going to listen to you. Now, you have to have perseverance. People talk about King and they talk about his great speeches. Nobody talks about when he was famous and hosted a meeting and nobody came. If you really care about an issue, it's not going to be glamorous. You're not going to change the world in 6 months. But if you care about it as much as you say you care about it and the people behind it, you'll be willing to work on that thing for as long as you need to work on it to see some change. And if you don't see the change, we know that there's that God sees our work and that we did it for the right reason. We have to have that kind of commitment, and we can change things, and in most cases will, when we put that, when we have that perseverance and when we approach it in that way.
Yeah, because this stuff doesn't happen overnight.
No.
These changes that we want to see happen, we talk a lot at Renaissance about the difference between deep fryer change or deep fryer discipleship versus crockpot, slow cooker discipleship, slow cooker change. And that sounds like what you're talking about, is that commitment to the long haul, even when we're not seeing instant results, even when the meal isn't fully cooked just yet. We're still going after it. Man, that's so good. Now, there's a question here that moves us a bit more to the global sector of things. We're inundated with information overload, whether it's from the news, from social media. And this person is asking the question, is it important for Christians to be aware of events occurring outside of our own spheres of influence? Outside of the right now? If so, why? And how can we find reliable news sources to keep help informing us about those things that are outside of maybe the city or maybe even the country?
Yeah, I think it's important because we care about all of humanity, number one, right? And we want to know what's going on. And in many cases, our country does have an impact on what's going on with other people. So who we vote for not only impacts what's happening domestically, it impacts what's happening all over the world to some extent. So I think that's important. The other thing you touch on is kind of talking about the media. And so one thing the AND campaign has been discussing with people is what we call media hygiene. Media hygiene. What you intake from the media is going to be what comes out in your opinion. So if I'm intaking garbage, then my opinion is going to be garbage at the end of the day, right? And one way that we end up kind of with a limited opinion, when I say garbage, that's kind of what I'm talking about. One way we end up with a limited opinion is when we completely just give in to what's called confirmation bias. And all of us want to do this. All of us want to just go to news sites that say exactly what we wanted to hear, that give us new information that only adds to the narrative we already had. That feels good. That gives you a little rush for a certain amount of time. But then you end up not really understanding the issues because you're not hearing the best arguments on the other side. We have to be willing to listen to people who disagree with us. And so here's what I would suggest that you do. Everyone in here, whether you lean right or lean left, you should have people on the right and left that you think are intellectually honest and intelligent. If you don't know anybody on the other side who you would say is intellectually honest and intelligent, intellectually honest doesn't mean you agree with their conclusion or they're right. It just means they're approaching it in an honest way. If you can't identify that on the other side, the problem isn't the other side. The problem is you. If you get all of your information from Fox News or MSNBC, you are misinformed because they're not giving you the best arguments on both sides. All right? And that's really important to understand because we can get trapped in just this echo chamber where we're always hearing what we want to hear, and there's great ideas out there that people have no idea about. And so, for instance, there's a lot of folks who are progressives that have no idea about somebody like Orrin Cass, who's kind of questioning the ways that a lot of conservatives have been doing economics for a long time, and sounds a lot like aspects of what a lot of progressives had said before, but is coming from it from a very conservative point of view. Just questioning some of the things that they made assumptions about. You wouldn't know that if you only listen to MSNBC, who's going to tell you that everybody on the right hates certain people, doesn't care about poor people. That's all you're going to hear. And if you believe that everybody on the other side hates you, you're wrong. If you believe everybody on the other side is spending all their time trying to make sure that they can be as malicious as possible and hurt certain groups on the other side, that's a lie. There are malicious people on both sides. I'm not denying that. But if you believe that almost everybody on the other side is out to get you, you've been fooled. And you need to get better sources of information. Question anybody, any influencer, any leader that always keeps you enraged, that always keeps you paranoid. When somebody, the only way they can move you is by keeping you enraged or paranoid, they're manipulating you. We are easily manipulated when we're enraged. Christians should never stay in a state of rage and never trust somebody who would want to keep us there. There's things to be indignant about, right? There's righteous indignation, and we can have that. We don't stay in a state of rage. And there's too many influencers being followed by Christians they're one-trick ponies because they keep you in that frame of mind, and that warps your spirit. That's not just. It's not just kind of like psychological, that's spiritual warfare. We have to push back against those kind of influencers.
Man, I cannot believe what time it is already. We're moving right along. We have a few more questions. And this is a great question from your talk. Man, I almost started weeping when you talked about trivializing pain. Because I feel like me personally, I have a lot of work to do in growing in my compassion for people. And Andrew asked the question, can you give examples of trivializing pain from both a progressive and conservative perspective?
Sure. From a progressive perspective, I would say, there's a lot of talk about white cisgender males as, kind of the source of all that is evil and that stuff like that. And it ignores the fact that in some parts of that demographic, people are dying early, like their life expectancy is going down. They're dying from deaths of despair. And if I listen again to MSNBC and certain influence, I would never know or care about that, right? I would just think that they're swimming in privilege and anything that happens to them is their fault because everything's at their hands and they can do whatever they want. That's a lie. And the sad thing is there's a lot of people on the left that believe it. That's a lie. There are people who are suffering. We're all suffering in the human condition. Nobody's life is just whole groups of people, their life is just that easy and they get whatever they want. But we listen to people who tell us that. On the right, I would say there's some people on the right that I think have no compassion for people who are genuinely struggling with things like transgenderism, right? Who just look at the people who become characters and start to hate those people but don't understand the person who maybe got rejected by the church, who the church told them the fire and brimstone behind all this stuff, but never showed them the love of the gospel. And we would reject those people instead of saying, I don't have to agree with your self-perception, but the pain, I can't dismiss your pain. If the gospel hasn't taught us that in both those instances, what have we learned from it? I don't have to agree with you to understand your pain and say, I'm going to protect you as much as I can, and I'm going to let God work on some of the other things that I may disagree with. But I got to care. And if we're not if there's nobody on this other side that their situation breaks our heart, what does it mean to be a Christian? And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get emotional about it, but it's like people are suffering on the other side. And yes, sometimes the people that represent them are the ugliest people and are terrible representatives of those people. And we get caught up on the ugly people who are standing on the front lines, who may be nasty and may be mean, and we look at them, but we don't have the moral imagination to look behind them. At the people that they're supposed to be defending. Christians have to be brokenhearted by these things, by the struggling of other people, even if I don't agree with you, even if you say you hate me. I'm brokenhearted by your situation, and I want to help you, even if you wouldn't help me. I mean, I've heard people say, one of the sad things in the black community was the crack epidemic, where crack just flooded our neighborhoods. We didn't bring it to us. It flooded our neighborhoods. And for generations, hurt people, destroyed families. And you see neighborhoods before the crack epidemic and after, it should be heartbreaking. And there were people who really did not care, who called the women that were suffering through this welfare queens. And dismissed them. Dismissed their suffering. And what hurts me more than ever is after going through that, now you have people in my community that will say, well, you didn't care about us during the crack epidemic, so I don't care about you during the fentanyl epidemic. That is the cycle of hatred the cycle of dismissing other people that Christians cannot take a part in. And any influencer, any leader who pushes us to accept those narratives and dismiss other people's pain needs to be rejected. And it's happening on both sides of the aisle. We can debate on which one is worse, but Christians can never accept that. So I apologize for getting emotional, but there's so many hurting people that we're close to that we dismiss based off narratives. Because we want to be seen as, what is it to be better than somebody who's suffering? And I think that's one of the most heartbreaking things about our this moment is the people that we dismiss because we find something wrong in their conclusion or how they've been represented.
You don't have to apologize for being emotional. This is worthy to be tearful, sorrowful over. And I think when I think about my own story, or I think about others that I interact with, my heart posture has a tendency to lean towards conviction and be disgusted by the sin of the other.
Yeah.
More than seeing them as Christ sees them. What practices, what truths help us to think through how to grow in our ability to be compassionate towards those who are in pain, rather than just see them as their sin or their end conclusion. Help us out there.
There's no better example than Jesus. He goes up to people who are so marginalized in society, people he's not supposed to speak to, people who are surprised that he's speaking to them. Like, why are you talking to me? And in his address to them, shows them love, reaches out a hand to them, shows them a compassion that they've never been shown before. There's somebody out there who doesn't expect you, because of your party, because of your ideology, to care about them. Go find them and care about them. Go find the person that you know is voting for this person other than you're voting for, and tell them you love them anyway. And the beauty of what he did, though, is he loved these people without coddling, right? And one of the prostitutes, he says, he forgives her. He says, your sins, which are many. He doesn't say that, and that's not your job to necessarily judge them. I'm just saying at the end of the day, it doesn't mean remove the truth from the conversation, right? It doesn't mean that there aren't reasons that I have a serious disagreement with you, right? So it doesn't mean, I love you, but I want to tell you you're wrong too. That's not what I'm saying. Show them love while not feeling like love means affirmation of everything they're doing. And I think that's one of the things that the left does get wrong. The left talks about love a lot, but it's a lesser love because it's a love that can't love without affirming. And that's not biblical. A truer love is truthful. It doesn't put Christian convictions to the side, but it also doesn't mean that I need to come and condemn you in my first conversation with you, or really ever. My job might just be to love you. And might be to bring the gospel to you and let the gospel convict you about what's going on in the same way that it convicts me. So I think at the end of the day, we need to go to people who we differ with and say, let us both take our brokenness to the cross, right? Instead of saying you need to be more like me, saying we need to both take our brokenness to the cross and be more like Christ. And if that is our message to other people, if we're showing them our brokenness instead of condemning them, I think we get a lot further than we have with other approaches.
Man, we're coming to a close here, and there's a slew of more questions. And for those of you whose questions we did not get to, your questions matter, and I think I can speak for Justin on this and our church. We want to keep the conversations going. hopefully what Justin has done for here tonight has equipped us by modeling what it looks like to have a conversation on very divisive issues while not being divided. And if you haven't done so already, I just encourage you to do two things. You want to keep learning how to have these conversations. A lot of these questions that are still posed here are answered in your book that you co-authored with Butler and Ware. It's a great resource for the church, as well as I believe it's called the Church Politic Podcast, right? That releases episodes about once a week. So I just want to encourage you towards that. A lot of those answers to those questions will be in those resources. But I would love to close with giving you the final word on two things. One, you talked a little bit about it at our luncheon today. Maybe just talking a bit about what AND campaign chapters look like in various cities. Maybe take about 5 minutes to do that. And then the second question is a bit more in depth. And it's what is your hope? And what is your prayer for the church that exists in America as she responds to whatever happens on November 5th?
Yeah.
Like, as you think about that concept of moral imagination, what is your hope and your prayer for the church post this election cycle?
Yeah, that's good.
So those two questions. Give us 5 minutes about what these AND campaign chapters are, and then your hope and prayer for the church.
Yeah, so the AND campaign, which my organization is a Christian civic organization, we want to raise civic literacy among Christians so that they understand the process better and how politics work. But we also want them to engage more faithfully. We want Christians to be less partisan and less ideological and focus on Christian principles. And we really believe that once we're less partisan and ideological and we say, okay, what does the Bible have to say about this? We're not going to agree on everything, but we'll have much more in common, right? We have the same great commandment. We have the same great commission. We have a lot in common, but you wouldn't be able to tell that by how we interact with each other in society. So that's what we want to do. In our book, we create a framework that we think should guide Christians politically and culturally that challenges progressivism and conservatism, right? And we want you to know, like, we shouldn't have a society where there are justice Christians over here and morality Christians over here, and neither of them wants to deal with the whole counsel of God. The gospel combines those things. The gospel does not make love and truth at odds. It does not make justice and moral order at odds. Those things work together. And when I talk about justice and I don't have morality and truth with it, as we see sometimes on the left, it goes completely out of control. And the same thing when I'm talking about morality and I don't have a sense of justice and love to go along with that, it becomes very harsh, right? Those things are meant to go together. And that's really what the AND campaign means. Compassion and conviction, love and truth, justice and moral order. That's a Christian public witness. And so basically what we want our chapters to do, when we have about 14 active chapters right now, is we want a group of people in your city to come together and spread that framework and reach out to every Orthodox community in your city to say, hey, have you heard about this framework? Let's do Bible studies or whatever. And just the message that you got from me today, pushing that for other people to hear, which is not just Justin's message. We truly believe this is an articulation of the gospel as applied to society today. This is how you should engage politics. Doesn't mean we all agree, but it means there are some boundaries that I think Christians are outside of right now that we need to come back into. The other thing our chapters want to achieve is we want to bring Christians from different parties, races, and all those things together to engage local issues. So we galvanize on a national basis as an organization, but we want our chapters to focus on local issues. I don't think Christians understand on a national and local level how much influence we would have if all Bible-believing Christians came together on an issue and said, we want this to change. Can you imagine? It's almost providence that we're in different parties. Can you imagine how powerful that would be? if we came together and say, yeah, we disagree on some things, but on these 3 issues, we wanted to change. There's almost no state in America that wouldn't have to listen to that if Christians really came together to do that. But guess what? We don't realize that we have allies that have an interest in keeping us separated. On both sides of the aisle, there are people who say, you know what, it's not really in my interest for Christians to agree and come together to get certain things done. And so we want our chapters on a local level to be able to galvanize the city to do those things, to do certain things and bring us all together. Last question is, what would I want to see?
As you imagine the future for the church, what would be your hope and prayer for her post this election?
Yeah, after this election, I would want Christians to be demonstrating that no election and no political division will pull us apart anymore. That we're mature enough spiritually to say, hey, we might have disagreed on this particular election, but we have to work together. And in working together, we create a model for the rest of society. If the church, with all the things we have in common, with this Jesus, with this gospel, with this great commission, if we cannot come together, how in the world do we expect the world to come together? How do we expect our society in America to come together? God has given us all the tools to be able to put all that other stuff aside and work together, to be humble, to be patient, right? To not take offense to every time somebody doesn't use the right vocabulary word to talk about a certain issue that we care about. We have the ability to do that, and I would like the church to be convicted about staying together and creating more unity even during and after moments like this. We're not going to always agree, but I'm determined to not let anybody think I want to lose a brother over an election where whoever gets elected, this is important, but whoever gets elected isn't even probably going to do half the stuff that they're talking about, right? I'm not going to lose a brother or sister over something like that. And I would like to see that type of determination, and when we have it, the church will come together.
Man, that's beautiful. And that's part of our hope and prayer for throwing this so close to the election. It wasn't to convince you guys who to vote for, who not to vote for, but how to have a proper Christ-like posture to those that we agree with and those who we disagree with. And not just up to November, but post-November. Because the Great Commission doesn't stop on November 5th. The gospel has to keep going out. So here's one thing I would love for you to do before I pray you guys out of here tonight, and before we give Justin, let's give him a round of applause right now. Now, for those of you who are around Renaissance, you're familiar with this question, but we're not going to do it publicly right now. We're going to do it privately. And maybe just take a mental note. So when somebody asks you about this event, our response isn't, it's good. It's okay. Here's what the question I want you to consider. What is one thing that you are leaving with tonight, that you did not come in with tonight? What is one thing that you're leaving with tonight that you did not come in with? That's transforming the way you're thinking. That's challenging previously held convictions. And that someone else must know about. Someone else must know. Just take 30 seconds. You can close your eyes, you can open up your hands, or you can just sit there, nice and relaxed. One thing that you're leaving with that you might not have come in with. 30 seconds. tell you mine. Man, do I want to grow to have more compassion. You modeled what compassion looks like for me. I'm going to remember that moment for the rest of my life. Thank you for that, brother. Thank you so much. Would you join me in praying? Father in heaven, you did immeasurably more than we ever thought, asked, or imagined tonight. And you will keep doing more than we can ever think or imagine, because you are that type of God. O Spirit of the living God that indwells all of us, grow us in Christ-like compassion. Grow us in Christ-like conviction. Oh, may we not be susceptible to the crafty ways of doctrine of this world. But may we be a people that is built up in truth and love, in mercy and justice. Spirit of the living God, keep us humble, but also make us bold. Where you call us to speak up and not remain silent. Where you call us to stand up and not sit down. Oh God, we cannot do this on our own. May we link arms together. And may we fully depend on the strength of your Spirit, the strength of your love and the strength of your grace to work powerfully and mightily through our weaknesses. We ask all this in the mighty name of Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Let the people of God say amen. Can we give a round of applause one more time for Justin? Appreciate you.